The lamplight fell in a soft pool, leaving the corners of the room to their secrets. It was just enough to kiss the pine walls a warm amber, to let the rest of the world be held by the dark. In that kind of deep quiet, my friend, you can hear the rhythm of your own heart. And there in that half-light sat Jake Miller, with 67 years of life etched into his face, his weathered hands cupped around the glass chimney, as if letting go would break something far more fragile than glass. It had been Ruth's lamp, you see. She believed a steady flame was a promise that you were still home, that your heart was still a place someone could find. He hadn't touched that wick in 3 years. It wasn't neglect. It was reverence. The flame burned now for memory, not for light. Beyond the window, the pines stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with a rain that was still just a promise in the air. The wind was only a breath, not enough to stir the bent tin on the roof, but inside the air itself felt heavy, humming with a sound just beyond the edge of hearing. Duke knew it first. The old hound lifted his head from the braided rug, his ears pricked a statue of pure attention. He made no sound. He just listened. He waited. Jake's gaze followed his old friend's landing on the wooden bin by the stove, the one where he kept the chicken feed. The lid was ajar just an inch or so, and the chain latch, my dear, was swinging a slow and gentle arc as if touched by a careful hand. It was too soft for the wind, and far too deliberate for a raccoon. He rose to his feet, his joints singing the old song of a body that had worked hard for 7 decades. As he drew near, the air shifted, carrying the faint, sweet scent of damp earth and something else, something wilder. The bin was half full just as it was yesterday, but the top of the sack was peeled back with a smoothness that spoke of intention, not of tearing. He knelt, his eyes tracing the floorboards, and there it was, a faint smudge just beyond the door frame. It was mud-thin and dark, with pine needles pressed into 5 uneven lines. Long lines. There was no tread of a boot, no print of a paw. It was a hand, my friend. A hand from something that did not often walk this way. Duke didn't offer a growl, not even a whisper of a bark. He simply padded to the door and sat his back rigid, his eyes fixed on something in the gloaming that Jake could not see. He was tense, yes, but not with fear. Jake opened the door with a slowness that felt like a prayer. There was nothing but the cool twilight air and the scent of pine. And then he saw it. There, on the very threshold beside the welcome mat Ruth had woven when her hands were still nimble and sure, lay 2 aspen leaves. They were pale gold, like the first blush of autumn, though the season had not yet turned. They were arranged in a perfect X, not blown there by a breeze, not scattered by chance. They were placed. A message. A current ran up his spine, pulling it tight as a wire. The breath caught in his chest, a captive thing. There was no sound, no movement. Just that X, a symbol of unknown meaning. Just that strange, heavy stillness pressing in on him from every side. He closed the door more gently than he ever had before, as if he feared waking a dream. Duke followed him, a silent shadow, back to the lamp. Jake stood there barely breathing while the dog lay at his feet, his noble head held high. The rain clouds gathered rolling like mussels beneath the skin of the sky. Far up the ridge beyond, where the forest thinned to shale, and the dens of foxes, a sound echoed across the mountain. It was low and deep, a single pulse like a great boulder turning over in its sleep, and then silence. It left no echo. It was not the sound of a storm. It was something else entirely. Jake's fingers tightened on the warm glass of the lamp. His heart remembered another night 13 years ago when a true storm had torn through these mountains. He remembered how the power lines had screamed before they died. He remembered Ruth's voice calling to him from the barn. He remembered how his boots had felt just a fraction too slow on that wet floor. He was 1 second too late to stop the beam that fell. Just 1 second. It was only ever 1 second. He had been slow once in his life. He swore to the quiet room that he would never be slow again. Now listen. I know what you might be thinking. An old man, a cabin deep in the woods, mysterious sounds in the night. It feels like a story you've heard before, doesn't it? But I need you to understand, my friend. What happened to Jake Miller in the Olympic Peninsula was not some ghost story told around a fire. This is real. It was witnessed. And what he discovered out there in those ancient mountains, well, it changes the map of everything you thought you knew about what breathes in the places we've forgotten. Before we walk into the heart of what happened on that stormy night in 1996, would you do something for me? Just press that subscribe button. This space we have here is for sharing real stories, the kind that make you look at the stars a little differently. And believe me, after you hear what Jake found, you'll want to be here for the rest of this journey. You see, Jake had been in that cabin alone for 3 years. 3 long years since he'd lost his Ruth. 3 years of rooms that held the echo of her laughter, of mornings that stretched into lonely infinities and nights that fell too quickly. Somewhere in that quiet expanse of time, he'd stopped marking the line where one day bled into the next. The cabin, much like him, wore its age with a stubborn grace. Its boards warped, its joints creaking, still standing against the wind, more from memory than from strength. He was a carpenter, you know. Or he had been. Retired now, if that's what you call it. He was 67 years old, with hands that held the memory of every nail they'd ever driven, every beam they'd ever set, every mistake they'd ever made. His father had taught him the craft back in the 50s, a time of true artistry. It was the kind of work where you didn't need a blueprint, because you could feel how the wood wanted to live, how the seasons would make it breathe, how time itself would test every single joint. The Olympic Peninsula was never meant to be their forever home. They'd bought the land back in '87, just a little summer place. 5 acres that bled right into the national forest with nothing but the whisper of pines for miles. Ruth had fallen in love with it instantly. She said it felt like the world before people got so impossibly loud. They built the cabin with their own 4 hands over the course of 2 summers. Every board was cut by them, every window set just right. It was supposed to be the dream they retired into. And then the cancer came. It was the fast and cruel kind, the kind that doesn't listen to reason. She made it through the Christmas of '93, but just barely. By February she was gone, and Jake was left alone in the home they had built together, surrounded by the beautiful ghosts of her touch. The curtains she had sewn, the herb garden she had planted, that beautiful lamp she had insisted on keeping full of oil. He had every intention of going back to Seattle, to sell the cabin to move closer to their daughter Emily down in Portland. But the months softened into years, and somewhere in the quiet rhythm of the forest, he stopped making plans that involved leaving. The silence here had a weight to it. It's true. It pressed against the walls and filled the empty spaces where Ruth's voice used to be. But it was an honest silence, my friend. It wasn't the kind that asked him how he was feeling, or told him it was time to move on. The mornings in those mountains never arrive in a hurry. They spill into the world slowly, like mist drifting over river stones, the light filtering down through the ancient pines until the little cabin itself seems to exhale a soft breath. Jake moved with that same unhurried grace. He folded his bedding with quiet hands, gently stirred the embers from the night before, and poured water into the old kettle that hissed as if it too held memories. Duke circled the door, once a familiar ritual, then settled onto the mat with a sigh that puffed from his nose. The old hound was 14 now. They had brought him home as a puppy right before Ruth got sick. She was the one who named him Duke after her own grandfather. She said he had the same deep, stubborn loyalty in his eyes. By the time the kettle began to hum its gentle song, Jake had shouldered his canvas pack and stepped out into the yard. It was an October morning, though he no longer marked the days on a calendar. The trees told him all he needed to know. The tamarack leaves were just beginning to fade at their edges. The creek behind the cabin sang a thinner, clearer song. The squirrels were louder these days, bolder their cheeks full, as if winter were already knocking at the door. He never liked to cut a living tree unless he absolutely had to. He gathered deadfall instead, dry limbs that the storms had offered to the forest floor, soft pine that was already shedding its bark. The axe that hung at his hip was more companion than tool. That morning he walked deeper into the woods than he usually did, past the split-rail fence he and Ruth had built through the sea of ferns and up toward the place where the creek bent around a great knuckle of stone. His eyes were still sharp, maybe not as fast as they once were, but they were clear. He noticed things. He noticed when the birds went quiet. He noticed when the squirrels froze in their frantic work. He noticed when the wind changed its mind without so much as a whisper against his shirt. And just past his log pile, the one with the soft moss on its north face and the rings of fungus on its stump, something made him stop cold. At first, it was just the shape. It wasn't a stump. It wasn't a boulder. It wasn't a bear. It was something smaller. It was hunched over, and my friend, it was shivering. It was covered in thick, dark fur, matted and clinging to small shoulders that trembled with every breath. Its arms seemed too long for its body, and its legs were bent at an odd angle as if they weren't yet used to standing. And the face. Oh, my heavens, the face. It wasn't human, not quite, but it was close enough to make his heart ache. The eyes were too wide, too knowing, and they were watching him with an expression that was a perfect, heartbreaking mix of fear and recognition. A baby. That's what his heart told him it was. It couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall. Blood was trickling from a deep gash on its leg, and it was making these soft, whimpering sounds that weren't animal, not really, but they weren't anything he had a word for either. Jake's first thought was to turn and walk away. Every scary movie he'd ever half-watched with Ruth screamed at him to leave, to just get away, to pretend he had never seen a thing. But the little creature was bleeding, and it was looking at him, truly looking at him, as if it knew he could help, as if it understood on some deep level that humans were supposed to be the ones who fixed broken things. His knees complained as he slowly crouched down. He moved with a deliberate gentleness, keeping his hands open and visible. It's the way you approach a frightened dog, you know. The creature. Because what else in the world could he call it? Tensed up, pressing itself back against the log. But it didn't run. Easy now, Jake heard his own voice say, rough and unfamiliar from disuse. Easy. The wound on its leg was a deep, dark line, a story told in claw marks, clean and parallel. Something had found it. A cougar, perhaps, or another of its kind. It was the sort of wound that would grant a slow death if left to fester, but a second chance if tended to with care. I knew I had first aid supplies back at the cabin. It's a habit I've kept from 20 years of construction work where someone was always needing to be patched up. I've mended more men than I can count, my friend. I told myself this was no different. Flesh is flesh, and blood is blood. But the thing is, I knew what this was, or at least what the stories called it. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, the ghost that tourists claim to capture in their grainy photographs. My Ruth used to laugh at those tales. She'd say that people want mystery so desperately they'll weave it from thin air, and I had always agreed with her. Had. I slipped the flannel from my own back, moving with the slow grace of someone approaching a wild, sacred thing, and held it out. The creature's eyes, full of a deep and ancient light, watched my hands. It didn't take the shirt, but it didn't flee either, and that, my dear, was a beginning. I'm going to help you, I whispered, unsure if it understood my words or just the kindness in my voice. "I'm going to fix that leg of yours. Then you can go on home. Is that a deal?" Its gaze followed my every move as I wrapped the soft flannel around its leg, my touch as gentle as I could make it. It flinched and that soft whimpering sound returned for a moment. But it let me work. And when I tied the fabric, when I sat back on my heels and looked at this impossible being, I saw it nod. Just once. A slight knowing gesture. It was understanding. It was recognition. It was an intelligence that shook me to my very soul. My chest felt so tight as if the world had just tilted off its axis, and my own heart was trying to find its new center of gravity. "Can you walk?" I asked, my voice barely a breath. It tried, bless its heart. It managed about 3 steps before the leg buckled. I caught it before it could touch the ground, surprised by how light it was. Maybe 60 pounds, all warm fur and a heartbeat as fast and frantic as a rabbit's. The cabin was a 1/4 mile away. My knees would surely ache for this, but I've carried heavier loads in my life. I adjusted my grip, settling its weight across my shoulders the way I used to carry timber, and started the slow walk home. My Duke met us halfway, took one look at my companion, and simply fell into step beside us. He didn't bark. He didn't even seem surprised. It was as if he'd known all along that something was waiting for us out there. And maybe, just maybe, he had. The next 3 days felt as if they existed in a place outside of time. My whole life I've been a man who solves problems you can see and touch, but nursing a creature that science tells you is a myth, that my friend required a different kind of wisdom. I made a place for him in the spare room, the one we kept for grandkids who never seemed to visit anymore. Our Emily stopped bringing the boys up after you left, Ruth. She said the quiet here was too heavy with memories. I think she just couldn't face her grief while standing so close to mine. This creature, I couldn't keep thinking of him as an it, seemed to be male. So in the quiet of my own mind, I began to call him Scout. It just felt right. He made his home in the corner by the window, refusing the bed but accepting the blankets I laid out. He wouldn't touch my food at first either. Not the bread, not the beans, not even the fresh trout from the creek. He just watched me with those eyes that seemed to hold the whole forest inside them. On the second day, I left a small bowl of blackberries by the door. By evening, they were gone, and the bowl was sitting on the porch, wiped clean, placed exactly where I set my coffee mug every single morning. Not dropped, not thrown, placed. On the 3rd day, Scout let me change the bandage. The wound was healing with an unnatural speed, the edges clean and free of infection. Whatever his kind is, they are made of a tougher, wilder grace. I cleaned it, rewrapped it, and Scout watched me the entire time. The fear was gone. In its place was a quiet curiosity. That evening, as the daylight faded and the lamp cast a warm amber glow across the room, I sat in my chair by the stove, and Scout sat across from me on the floor. We did nothing at all. We didn't speak, for what words could we possibly share? We just breathed in the same quiet space, and somehow my love that felt like the most natural thing in the world. The forest at night is a cathedral of shadows. The trees rise like ancient pillars holding up a ceiling of infinite stars. The silence has the weight of a prayer. I have always felt small out here, but in a good way. The way you feel when you realize the world is so much larger than your sorrow. I thought about you then, Ruth, how you loved these woods, how you would sit on this porch at dusk and just listen. You said the quiet had its own language if you only knew how to hear it. I never quite understood what you meant, but I do now. Scout made a sound, a low rumble from deep in his chest, almost like a purr. It felt like contentment, or perhaps gratitude. I just nodded, saying nothing, and we sat like that until the lamp began to sputter, and the darkness settled in the corners, like an old friend come to stay a while. On the fourth morning, Scout was gone. I found the window open. Not broken, my dear, but opened. The latch was turned, the glass slid up, and the screen was removed and leaned carefully against the wall. The blankets were folded, not neatly, but with a clear and deliberate attempt. The bandage was sitting on the windowsill. It still held a trace of his blood, but not much. The wound must have been almost entirely healed. And on the porch, right where I always leave my boots, lay a gift. 5 smooth river stones, each the size of a walnut, arranged in a careful, perfect line. Between each stone, a single blade of grass had been tied into a loop. It wasn't random. It was purposeful. It was a thank you written in a language older than words. I picked up one of the stones. It was still warm from his touch. I closed my fingers around it, feeling its weight, its smooth surface worn by time and water, and something deep inside my chest loosened. A knot I'd been holding for 3 years finally came undone. I wasn't alone out here. I never had been. The forest holds more than just trees and silence. It holds a gentle wisdom, a kindness that transcends all species. It holds acts of grace that need no proof beyond the simple, beautiful fact that they happened. And that my love should have been the end of it. A lovely story, a strange and secret memory. But this is where our story truly begins to unfold. Because the gifts, they kept coming. Every few days something new would appear. A cluster of pine cones arranged in a perfect spiral. A feather from an eagle laid across my doorstep like a sacred offering. Once a whole salmon fresh caught and still cold from the creek. I started leaving things in return. An apple, some dried venison, a spool of fishing line I wasn't using anymore. I didn't see Scout again, but I knew he was out there. I could feel it sometimes, that gentle sensation of being watched. It wasn't threatening. It was just a presence. The way you know someone is home before you see them. The way a husband and wife can feel each other's heart from 3 rooms away. And my dear Duke, he sensed it too, you know. He began these quiet vigils by the door at the most curious hours, his ears angled toward the world, not with alarm, but with a deep, listening stillness. He was waiting. Sometimes he'd rise and drift to the window, resting his paws on the sill, to gaze into the deep, dark woods, his tail tracing slow, hopeful arcs in the air. The world outside my window began to dream. October bled its fire into the quiet gray of November, and the first snow, a shy and early visitor, came to kiss the pines white. It hushed everything, my friend. Sounds grew soft and close. Footsteps were swallowed by the powder, and the whole world seemed to slow its breath, as if the mountain itself had pulled up a blanket and settled in for a long rest. I kept the lamp burning a small sun in my window through those long nights. It wasn't for the light it cast in the room, but for the light it sent out into the dark. It was my signal, my promise, my silent witness. A way to let the mystery know that I was still here, that my heart was still open to this strange and sacred conversation we had begun. Oh, how I ached to tell my Emily. I must have picked up the phone a dozen times, my thumb hovering over her name. But the words, they just wouldn't form. How do you tell the person you love? My dearest, I've been leaving supper for a giant in the woods, and he leaves me stones in return. She'd worry the solitude had finally unwoven my mind. She'd think of homes and doctors. And maybe she'd have been right. I've known good men to lose their way in the wilderness of grief, to see ghosts in the trees. But these gifts, my friend, they were as real as the floor beneath my feet. The salmon had been solid in my hands. I'd cooked it over my own fire, and when I ate it, it tasted of the cold river and wildness, not of madness. And so I held this secret close to my heart. I kept to my rhythms, the steady chop of the axe, the daily filling of the lamp. I'd leave my offerings where the woods began, and in the morning find new treasures in their place. It was a language of exchange older than any coin, a bond more ancient than any city. We were just two souls, you see, quietly saying to one another, "I see you," and finding in that simple truth a universe of comfort. Then came the night that remade my world. It was December 14th, 1996. I'll never forget the date, my friend, because it was my Ruth's birthday. She would have been 65 years old. My only plan was to be still with my memories, perhaps turn the pages of an old album, perhaps not. A heart's sorrow, as you know, keeps its own time. Around 8 o'clock, a storm unlike any other poured over the mountains, not born of weather, but of will, as if it had been summoned. The wind arrived first, a great invisible hand that bent the pines until they wept and groaned. Then came the rain, so cold and heavy, it felt solid like falling stones. Lightning tore open the belly of the sky, and thunder answered so immediately, the very bones of my little cabin shook. The lights, of course, surrendered at once. The lines were no match for such fury. I lit the lamp, its flame, a small brave heart in the roaring dark. I checked the woodpile, made sure my dear Duke was safe inside the old familiar dance of a mountain storm. I thought I knew its steps by heart. But this was a different song entirely. The air was thick with a strange energy, a hum of pure potential that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It felt as though the very fabric of the world had grown thin, and something vast and ancient was pressing against it from the other side. Duke felt it too, my brave boy. He couldn't settle, just paced a worried line from the door to the window, a low, troubled sound humming deep in his chest. And then around 10, the knocking began. It wasn't on my door, but on the window to the little room where Scout had healed. It was a rhythm, a purpose. 3 soft taps, a breath of silence, and then 3 more. I stood there in the flickering dark, lamp in hand, my heart performing a wild rhythm I hadn't known it still remembered at 67. I moved toward the spare room, and in a brilliant, silent flash of lightning I saw it. A hand pressed gently to the glass. It couldn't be Scout's. It was far too large, with 5 long fingers, knuckles like river stones, and a palm as broad as my supper plate. The hand drew back into the storm, and the knocking came again. 3 more taps, but softer now, so tender it felt like a question. And so I opened the window. The storm rushed in to greet me, a wild breath of rain that soaked the sill and my shirt, but I didn't mind. I just stood there, my small lamp pushing its fragile light into the beautiful waiting darkness. Another flash of lightning, closer this time, painted the world in silver. And in that heartbeat of pure light, I saw them. There were 5 of them standing on the ridge behind my home. They were impossibly tall, 7, maybe 8 feet, with shoulders as broad as the ancient pines, cloaked in dark fur that shed the rain like a second skin. One stood before the other 4, and this one, the largest, raised a hand, not in threat, but in invitation. A gesture that said, without a sound, "Come." And the sound that followed, oh, my friend, it wasn't a voice. It was something far deeper, a resonance that seemed to rise from the very belly of the earth. A single low note that wove itself into the storm, as if it were the heart of the thunder itself. And Duke, my Duke, he fell silent. He simply sat, and he watched with me. Every sensible part of my mind was screaming a frantic chorus of, "Close the window, bolt the door, find the gun." But beneath all that noise was another voice, a whisper as old as the mountains themselves, and it simply said, "Trust." So I pulled on my coat, my old worn boots. Duke moved to my side, ready to face the world with me, but I gently shook my head. "Stay," I whispered. He didn't want to, but he listened. My good boy, my very best boy. The rain was a cold, punishing thing, and my old bones cried out with every step the arthritis of fire in my joints. I shielded the lamp's precious flame with my body as the wind tried to steal it away. I'd only made it about 20 feet into that beautiful chaos when they began to move toward me. They descended from the ridge with a slow grace, a deliberate gentleness meant to soothe, not to frighten. The one who had beckoned me stopped about 10 feet away, while the others fanned out behind him a silent crescent. It felt like a guard of honor, a gesture of profound respect, and then the sky opened for 3 long, breathtaking seconds. In that perfect, lingering light I saw them. I truly saw them. I saw the deep intelligence in their eyes, the story of years etched into their faces, the silver of age in their dark fur. My heart knew the truth in that instant. These were not monsters. They were a people. A different people, an impossible people, but a people all the same. The one who led them. He was old, I could tell. It was in the careful, measured way he moved the way one moves when the body remembers a youth the bones have long since forgotten. I knew that feeling well. It was a language we both understood. He raised his hand and pointed first to me, then to my little cabin, then back toward the great dark ridge from which he came. The meaning was as clear as the rain on my face. Your home, our forest. A silent treaty drawn between 2 worlds. Then he gestured to the smallest of the figures behind him, and my breath caught in my throat. Scout stepped forward, still limping, yes, but moving with a new strength. Alive, healing. He looked right at me, and a soft sound rumbled in his chest, a sound of joy, I think. Of thanks. The old one laid a hand on Scout's shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes. This is my family. You protected one of our own. We thank you. I could only nod, my friend. What words could I possibly have offered that would be enough? The cold rain had found its way through my coat, and I was shivering, but I didn't move an inch. I couldn't. It felt like standing in the most holy of cathedrals, witnessing a truth so profound you dare not breathe too loud. The old one took a step closer, and my grip tightened on the lamp, not from any fear, but from the beautiful, impossible weight of the moment. And then he knelt. He truly knelt before me, bringing his ancient face level with mine. He reached out a hand, so slowly showing me his every intent, and opened his palm in offering. Resting in his palm was a stone larger and darker than any he had left me before. It was smooth as a river's heart, but wrapped around it, tied with blades of grass woven into a pattern as fine as lace, was something else entirely. I leaned in with my lamp, and its light fell upon a small metal button. It was old brass green with age. Military issue, I was sure of it. From the Second World War, if my memory served me right. And then this gentle soul offered it to him, a silent plea whispered on the wind. Take this. Hold our memory. Hold this moment. And Jake, my dear, he accepted. The stone was a warm secret against the cold rain, and the brass button felt like it held a universe of stories. The elder gave a single knowing nod, rising with that familiar weary song of old bones, a melody Jake knew by heart, before retreating into the quiet. They didn't run, you see. They didn't vanish like a phantom's trick. They simply turned, walking back to the ridge, dissolving into the forest, the way smoke becomes the shadow. The storm still raged, the sky torn open by lightning, but there he stood, Jake with rain tracing paths down his face, clutching a stone and a button, feeling as though he'd just borne witness to the sacred passing of a king. A profound, final, and utterly complete farewell. He found his way back to the warmth of his home, shedding his rain-soaked layers like an old skin. After toweling himself dry, he placed the stone and button upon the mantel right beside the smiling face of his Ruth. Duke, ever the silent guardian, gave them a thoughtful sniff before settling by the fire, a deep sigh escaping him, as if he understood that some great unspoken question had finally been answered. My friend Jake sat there in his chair, a tremor still running through him from the cold, or maybe from the sheer wonder of it all. He tried to piece it together, but sense wasn't the word he was looking for. This wasn't something to be understood, but to be felt. He had been welcomed into a secret, accepted scene. Two worlds, my dear, had met in the heart of a storm and recognized the soul of the other. It wasn't about power, you understand. Not master over animal or scientist over subject. It was simply two families. Two peoples, each just trying to find their way to raise their children to live with a little grace in a world that so often forgets to leave space for souls like theirs. That night he slept a sleep so deep, it felt like a journey to the center of the earth, a place without dreams, only rest. And when he awoke, the storm had whispered its last. The sky was a shade of blue, so pure, so impossible, you only see it after the world has been washed clean. The forest glittered, every leaf and branch adorned with tiny sun-catching jewels. Everything, my friend felt, born anew. He noticed the window in the spare room stood open, a detail forgotten in the night's wonder. But nothing had trespassed. Only the crisp cold air and the sacred scent of rain-soaked pine had come to visit. And oh, that winter! It was the quietest Jake had ever known. Not a silence of emptiness. The forest is never truly silent, but a deep and abiding peace. It was the quiet that settles between two hearts after a long-needed talk, when all the words have been said and all of them have been heard. The small gifts continued to appear, though not as often. A single stone left by the door, a collection of feathers arranged just so, and then, after one particularly heavy snow, he awoke to find his entire driveway cleared. Not by a plow, my dear, but by hand. The snow was moved aside in the most perfect rows, stacked high like fortress walls. It must have taken hours, a silent, devoted team working as one. He found he didn't need to leave as many offerings himself. Their conversation had grown beyond that, you see. It was now a quiet understanding, a simple knowing. He would see their tracks, those magnificent prints crossing his land on their way to the creek. He'd find branches woven into patterns no wind could create, crosses and spirals, and once a sight that took his breath away, what looked for all the world like a crudely made star. They were signs not of warning, but of a promise whispered through the woods. We are here. We see you. We remember. His daughter Emily called in February, her voice a warm thread from another world. She asked if he was lonely, if he'd reconsidered her offer of a small apartment in Portland, close to her and the kids. He told her with a truth that settled deep in his bones that he was fine. More than fine, actually. And she, bless her heart, she heard the truth in his voice and didn't push, just said she loved him and would visit when the roads cleared. He told her he would like that very much. After the call ended, he stood on his porch, cradling his coffee, and watched the dawn paint the snow in shades of gold and rose and other colors that have no name. He thought of Scout out there somewhere, waking to this same light, learning the ways of the wild, carrying a scar that would forever be a map of the day. A human chose kindness when he didn't have to, and his thoughts, as they so often did, drifted to his Ruth. You would have loved her. She always said the world was so much larger than we let ourselves see. She believed in kindness as an act of faith, something you do not for reward, but because it's the only true way to walk through this life. Oh, she would have loved this story. She would have believed every word. She would have probably wanted to meet them. And who's to say she hadn't, my friend? Perhaps the world beyond this one lets you see all the magic you always hoped was real. Perhaps she was watching even then, a gentle smile on her face, whispering, "I told you so, my love. I told you so." His coffee had grown cold in his hands, but he couldn't bring himself to move. He just stood there, breathing air so pure it was a prayer, and felt something that had been a stranger for years. Contentment. Not the bright, loud shout of happiness, but its quiet, steady cousin. The profound peace of knowing you are exactly where you are meant to be, woven into the fabric of something so much larger than yourself. Duke nudged his head under Jake's hand, a familiar comfort. The old hound was walking the same gentle slope of age, his muzzle silvered with time, his days filled more with sleep than with motion. They were both on a journey toward the horizon, weren't they? But time no longer felt like a thief. It felt like a friend walking quietly beside them. Spring arrived softly that year, a slow and tender unfolding. The snow receded in patches, revealing the dark, sleeping earth, which soon awoke with shoots of green. The creek became a roaring, joyful thing, and the birds returned to sing the world awake. And with that warmth, my dear, came new visitors. Not Scout, nor the elder. These were different souls, younger perhaps, their curiosity, a palpable thing in the air. They kept their distant shadows moving between the trees at twilight. And sometimes he would hear it, that low rumbling call, a sound that was not quite a word, not quite a song, but a language of being. It spoke of presence. It spoke of awareness. He started taking his long walks again, his knees complaining, but his spirit insisting. He rediscovered places in those woods that held pieces of his heart. The waterfall a good 2 miles up the ridge, the meadow where his Ruth once gathered wildflowers, the old fire lookout tower abandoned since the 1960s, surrendering itself so gracefully to moss and rust. And in these sacred places, he would find their gifts: a smooth river stone, a fan of feathers, once a deer skull cleaned by the elements to a perfect bleached white, a strange and starkly beautiful offering. He left his own tokens in return: a can of beans, a length of fishing line, and an old harmonica he'd kept since his Navy days, silent for decades. Maybe they would like its reedy song, or maybe they'd toss it aside. Either way was fine with him. You know, the thing about truly living in the mountains, not just surviving, but belonging, is that you learn to measure time differently. You let go of days and weeks and start to feel the turning of the seasons in your bones. You watch the sun paint its slow path across the sky. You notice the subtle shift of the morning light on your porch. You feel the year move like a great gentle wheel, steady and true. Jake turned 68 that May. It wasn't a day for celebration, just a quiet turning of a calendar page. But that evening, as he sat on the porch, Duke resting at his feet, the lamplight a soft gold around them, he saw him. He saw Scout. The young one had grown, my friend. He must have stood 4.5 feet tall now, his shoulders broader, his movements filled with a new, certain grace. He stood just at the edge of the trees, a figure held between shadow and light, his gaze fixed on the cabin on Jake. And Jake, he just lifted his hand. A simple wave, a greeting that said everything. "Hello. I see you." Scout stepped out then into the last of the day's gentle light. He was holding something, a stick, Jake first thought. But as he drew closer, stopping a respectful 20 feet away, Jake saw it was a carving. The work was rough, but so full of heart. It was a figure shaped like a man. Scout placed it carefully on a flat rock before stepping back. He pointed to the carving and then to Jake. The meaning was as clear as a mountain spring. A gift. A thank you. A memory. Gah. The small figure was perhaps 6 inches tall. Its face was simply shaped, its arms at its sides standing tall and straight. It could have been any man, but it also could have been Jake. The likeness didn't matter, you see. The intention was a sunbeam. You mattered. This time we shared mattered. Never forget. And with that, Scout turned loping back toward the embrace of the trees with a newfound fluid grace. He paused at the tree line, a final glance back, and then he was gone, dissolved into the green shadows and the coming night. My dear Jake just sat there, a silent witness, as the sky bled from rose to violet, to the deepest ink of night. He watched until the stars pricked through the darkness like tiny holes in a vast dark canvas, until the old lamp began to flicker, and his sweet Duke whimpered softly in his dreams, and only then did the biting cold finally chase him back inside. He gently placed the small carved figure upon the mantelpiece, finding its home beside the smooth stone, the simple button, and the photograph of his beloved Ruth. It was a small collection of impossibilities. You see tangible evidence of the unbelievable. It was all the proof he needed that some truths, the most important ones, never ask for the world's permission to exist. Oh, that summer was a gentle one. It was filled with those warm, sun-drenched days and cool, clear nights. The kind of perfect weather that whispers a reminder of why you fell in love with a place. Jake poured himself into the cabin, fixing a loose board on the porch, replacing some tired siding and sealing the windows against the coming winter. Just ordinary work, the kind of steady rhythm that keeps a man's hands occupied and his heart from wandering into sorrow. Every now and then he would catch a glimpse of them. He had come to think of them as the family you know, Scout, with his parents and his siblings. They moved through the forest with the grace of flowing water, barely rustling a leaf, leaving almost no sign they were ever there. But Jake, he knew their secrets now. He knew what to look for, a broken branch just so high, a faint track in the damp earth, or that profound silence that would fall over the birds, a hush born not of fear, but of pure reverence. It never once crossed his mind to take a picture of them, not for a single moment. You see, this was never about proving anything to anyone. This was a matter of trust. They had revealed themselves to him because he had helped their little Scout, because he had shown them his heart was a safe place. To bring a camera into that space would have shattered something essential between them. It would have twisted a profound mystery into a cheap spectacle and tarnished something that had for him become truly sacred. And besides, who could he ever show? Who in this world would ever believe him? He could just picture himself walking into the local newspaper office with his photos. He could see their polite, condescending smiles and feel the gentle dismissal, another old man out in the woods seeing things. No, it was so much better to hold it close, to keep it as his own precious secret, to keep it real. His new neighbors, the Johnsons, stopped by once that summer. They were probably in their mid-50s, still glowing with that bright-eyed enthusiasm folks get when they first escape to the mountains. They asked him all the usual questions about bears, if he ever felt afraid being so far from town, and if he gave any credit to all those wild stories people told about Bigfoot. Jake just looked them right in the eye, his voice as calm as a Sunday morning, and he told them, "They aren't monsters. They just don't belong to us." The husband let out a little laugh, and his wife just blinked as if she couldn't quite process the words. They left with a jar of Jake's homemade choke cherry jam and offered waves that felt a little hollow. You know, they never came back after that, and that was perfectly all right. Some truths, my friend, are not meant for every soul to hear. August arrived with a heavy heat that drew the scent of resin from the pines and made the old cabin groan as it stretched in the sun. Jake would spend his afternoons in the cool shade rereading paperbacks whose pages he knew by heart, or simply sitting with his eyes closed, listening to the world breathe. His dear Duke was sleeping more and more. At 16 years old, he was an ancient soul for a hound, and his breath had begun to catch in his chest, a soft, rattling sound like old coins in a pocket. And Jake, he knew that sound intimately. He had heard it in his own father's chest just before he passed, and he'd heard it in his sweet Ruth's breath during her final weeks. It was the sound a body makes when it's announcing it is finished, when the gentle machinery is winding down, and time has finally claimed its due. He wasn't ready to hear it again. But then readiness has no say in these matters, does it? On a quiet Tuesday morning, they made the drive to the veterinarian in Forks. She was a woman of maybe 40, with kind eyes and the gentlest of hands. She examined Duke so carefully, listening to his heart, feeling his belly, and then she leaned back with that look, a look Jake knew all too well. It was the one that says, "I am so sorry," the one that means, "There is nothing more I can do." "How much time does he have?" was all Jake could ask. "A week, maybe 2, she said softly. "His heart is failing, my dear, and his kidneys are as well. I can give him something to keep him comfortable, but—" "Please," he whispered. "Do it." And she did. She gave sweet Duke an injection right there, sent Jake home with a small bottle of pills, and charged him $40. He would have paid 1,000, my friend. He would have paid anything if it could have bought him just a little more time. But it couldn't. Time, you see, is the one thing that is never for sale. His beloved Duke held on for 11 more days. He spent most of them sleeping in his favorite spot by the door, soaking in the warm patch of sun that blessed the floor each afternoon. And then, on the 11th day, he woke just before dawn. He looked at Jake with those old knowing eyes that said everything that needed to be said. It's time. And then he laid his head down one last time. It was just like that, so peaceful. No drama, no struggle. Just a soft sigh, a gentle shudder, and then he was gone. Jake buried him beneath the great ponderosa pine behind the cabin, the very one Duke loved to rest under on hot days. He wrapped his dear friend in one of Ruth's old quilts. He knew she would have wanted that. And he just dug. He dug until his hands were raw, and his back was screaming until the earth was deep enough to keep him safe. He spoke not a single word the entire time. There were no words vast enough for this sorrow. There was only the sound of the shovel breaking the soil, the steady aching rhythm of grief given form. When it was done, when the last of the soil was patted down, and a flat river stone marked the place, he simply sat down, his back resting against the tree, and he wept. It was the first time he had truly cried in 3 long years, not since he lost his Ruth. It was that kind of deep, soul-shaking crying that comes from the very core of your being, the kind that hollows you out, leaves you utterly spent, but somehow strangely cleaner on the inside. The entire forest fell silent as he wept. It was as if even the birds were holding their breath in respect. And when the tears finally ceased, when he had wrung his heart dry and the sun had journeyed halfway across the sky, he heard it. A low rumbling call echoing from far up in the hills. It came only once, a sound of acknowledgement, of condolence. It was a voice that said, "We know, we grieve with you." He wiped his tear-streaked face on his sleeve and gave a slow nod, a gesture meant for no one and for everyone all at once. Without Duke, the cabin just felt wrong. It was a quiet that had nothing to do with a lack of sound. It was an emptiness. Jake would catch himself glancing at the door, fully expecting to see him there, or starting to call his name before the heavy truth settled in again. Grief is a trickster like that, isn't it? It ambushes you when you least expect it, coming at you from the blind spots of your heart. So he just kept working. It was the only answer he had ever known. You work until your body aches so much that it gives your heart a moment's peace. He chopped wood he didn't need, splitting logs until his shoulders burned with fire. He built a new shelf in the shed for no reason at all. He just had to stay busy to stay in motion, because to stop moving was to feel, and to feel right then felt like drowning. September arrived on a breath of cooler air, pulling the days in shorter. High on the ridges, the aspens began to catch fire with gold. He'd watched the geese fly over in their perfect formations heading south, and he felt they knew some secret he didn't. Or maybe he thought they just knew the one great secret we all do, that change is the only constant, that nothing is meant to stay, and that to keep moving is how you survive. The gifts kept appearing a few times a week now, just small, simple things always left in the same places on the flat rock near the edge of the woods or the old stump by the creek. But one morning he found one right on Duke's resting place, a perfect circle of smooth white stones. They knew. They had seen his sorrow, and they were marking the grave just as they would for one of their own. So Jake began leaving flowers in return, wildflowers he would gather on his walks. His Ruth had always loved flowers, and Duke had always loved following Ruth. It just felt right, you see, to connect them all that way. By morning, the flowers would be gone, sometimes replaced with a feather or a pine cone, and sometimes with nothing at all. But the space was always left cleared, tended to, and deeply respected. The first snow came early again that October. It was just a dusting, but it was enough to hold their secrets. One morning, Jake saw them, 5 sets of tracks, all different sizes, leading from the forest right up to his porch and back again. The family had come visiting while he slept, standing perhaps just 10 feet from his window. And on the porch rail they had left him a gift, 3 river stones each, with a perfect hole worn clean through its center. Thousands of years of flowing water had made those holes. It was patience, made solid and real. He threaded them onto a piece of fishing line and hung them from a beam on the porch. They turned so slowly in the breeze, clicking softly against one another, making their own quiet music. His Ruth had always said that wind chimes were just prayers you didn't have to say out loud, and he thought maybe she had been right about that too. As the nights grew longer, a deep and lasting cold settled into the bones of the world. Jake kept the fire burning most evenings, watching the flames cast dancing shadows across the walls. His thoughts would often drift to little Scout. He'd wonder if he was grown now, teaching his own children how to trust, how to watch, how to know kindness when they saw it. He'd wonder if the story of the old human who offered help would be passed down through their generations, becoming a small part of their lore, their own quiet mythology. And maybe in the end, that's all any of us can ever really hope for. To be remembered for our kindness, to have our small actions echo beyond our own fleeting time here, to know that we mattered to someone even if that someone walks on different feet and speaks a language our hearts can only begin to understand. A letter from Emily arrived with the November chill, my friend, and her worry was a thread woven through every line. He wrote back to her, my dear, trying to quiet her heart, telling her that this very isolation she feared was the point of it all. He mailed his heart from Forks, and while there gathered the simple sacraments of his life, coffee flour and the kerosene that fed his light in the darkness. On the long drive home, a sorrowful sight made him pull the truck over. A young doe, her life fading in a ditch by the roadside. He stood there for a long moment, the rifle's warmth a strange comfort in his hands, gazing at the life that had been extinguished in less than 30 seconds. But even as that thought settled, he saw them, my friend. 3 silent figures at the edge of the trees about 50 yards away, drawn by the sound. Jake offered a slow nod in return, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, and then they were gone, melting back into the trees. He drove the rest of the way home in a daze, the rifle cleaned and put away, his dinner eaten without taste, his mind a canvas for the moonlight. You see, no answers ever came to him in the night, they so rarely do for any of us. But the questions themselves, felt like a kind of prayer. December swept in with storms that wrapped his cabin in a blanket of white, and he spent his days in the soft glow of the lamp, a constant beacon. The anniversary of Ruth's passing arrived a quiet marker of 13 years, a number he never gave much thought to. That night, he heard them not their rumbling calls, but the soft press of footsteps circling his home, a slow and deliberate patrol. After what felt like 10 minutes, the steps paused at his door, followed by 3 knocks, a rhythm he knew in his soul from that stormy night years ago. Scout was on his porch, a giant now standing nearly 7 feet tall, but Jake knew those eyes knew the memory of an old wound in his leg. Scout held the offering out and Jake took it, their fingers brushing for a fleeting warm moment, a touch that made everything real. A low rumble, a language of the heart, came from Scout before he turned and walked back toward the shadows where his family, 5 or maybe 6 of them, waited. Jake closed the door, the scent of the herbs he hung by the fire filling the small cabin, a fragrance clean and ancient, like a memory you could breathe. And that night, my friend, he slept more deeply and peacefully than he had in all the months that came before. The winter deepened its hold, the snow piling ever higher, shrinking his world to the warmth of the cabin and the promise of the burning lamp. January arrived with a cold that had teeth, my dear, a cold that found every tiny crack in the walls and made him ration the precious kerosene for his lamp. On the morning of January 23rd, he awoke to a silence so profound it was almost a sound itself, the kind that only a heavy new-fallen snow can bring. He was truly snowed in, a prisoner of winter's beauty, and while food wasn't a worry, the firewood inside would only last him 2 days more. He began to save the wood immediately, letting the fire whisper down to embers, wearing every piece of clothing he owned against the encroaching cold. By the second morning, a quiet fear began to settle in his heart. With only 10 pieces of wood left, he knew he had to try and reach the shed. He wrapped himself in every layer he possessed, opening the door to a solid wall of white, and began to carve a tunnel with his bare hands. It took him a full hour to move just 10 feet, his body screaming in protest with every motion, but what choice did he have? But to go on. He had carved his way maybe 15 feet when he heard it, that deep rumbling call so very close, and looked up to see the entire family watching him. The old one with Scout by his side stepped forward, moving through the impossible snow as if it were merely mist, and they came to his little tunnel. And then, my friend, they began to dig, not like men, but like a force of nature, clearing a path and stacking 2 cords of wood on his porch in mere minutes. Jake just stood there, trembling, not just from the cold, but from a gratitude so immense it felt like the whole world shifting beneath his feet. As the elder drew near, my dearest, Jake could finally trace the silver in his face, the deep lines of a life lived. They were kindred spirits in age, I imagine, both fueled by a stubborn will to live on borrowed time. Then the old one's hand met Jake's shoulder, a single firm touch that spoke volumes, a silent promise. I see you. You are not alone in this world. And just as quietly they were gone, dissolving back into the white tapestry of the forest before my dear Jake could even form the words, thank you. But thanks felt so small, so inadequate for what had passed between them. It was something deeper than gratitude, a truth that words couldn't touch. It was a covenant, a bond. It was family in its own wild and wonderful way. He returned to the quiet of his home, my love, and coaxed the fire back to life until the little cabin was filled with a warm golden light. He brewed coffee, the familiar aroma a comfort, and stood by the window, cup in hand, watching the edge of the woods until the world was cloaked in darkness. It was a simple, profound truth. They had saved his life. Without their gentle intervention, the cold would have claimed him perhaps tonight, or maybe tomorrow. But it would have been soon. They had known, you see. They had watched over him, seen his struggle, and reached out across the silence to help. The real question wasn't why they had helped my friend, but how he had ever existed without the knowledge of them. How had he walked this earth for 68 years, believing humanity was solitary, that we were somehow special, the sole keepers of compassion in this vast universe? But we weren't alone. We never had been. We were just too blinded by our own pride, too consumed by our fears, and too sure of our own place in the world to ever truly see. With February came a softening, a whisper of a thaw in the air. The endless snow finally ceased, and the temperature climbed just enough to turn the world into a messy, hopeful mix of slush and mud, that awkward dance between winter and spring. My Jake began to venture out again, checking his small domain for winter's toll, and found that the gifts had multiplied. It was their way of checking in, their quiet way of ensuring he had made it through. And so his own offerings grew in kind, my love. He began leaving whole meals, a roasted chicken, fresh bread jars of vegetables he'd put up himself. These were gifts of effort of heart. Each one a message: I see what you did for me. I understand its weight. I am trying to give back, though I know I never truly can, not in a way that could ever match you, carrying firewood through 3 feet of snow for me. My dear Emily called in March, her voice a welcome sound. She asked when she might come for a visit, and he told her to wait for spring for the roads to clear, and the world to turn green again. She had something to tell him. She said something that couldn't be shared over the phone. She promised she'd be up in April. April arrived on a symphony of wildflowers and birdsong, the very air sweet with the scent of thaw. And with it came Emily, her Subaru, navigating the muddy drive on a Tuesday afternoon, pulling up beside his faithful old Ford. When she stepped out, he saw that time had touched her too. 52 now, with silver threaded in her hair and gentle lines around her eyes. He wondered just for a moment when that had happened. Their embrace was hesitant at first. They were never a family for grand displays, but it softened into something warm and real. And in that closeness, he caught the scent of her mother's perfume. He wondered if she wore it for him, or if some things like the love for a certain fragrance are simply passed down through the heart of a family. She stayed for coffee, and they fell into the easy rhythm of catching up. She spoke of her boys both away at college and finding their way, of her husband still working but dreaming of retirement, of her own career as a credit union manager, steady and sensible. The small, safe talk of a life lived far from the woods. Then, in a quiet moment, she looked at him and said, "Dad, I'm so worried about you." And there it was, the conversation he knew had been coming for years, a quiet storm on the horizon. "Oh, I'm just fine, my dear Em," he answered softly. "But you're nearly 70. She pressed her voice full of love and fear. "You're out here all alone. Remember when you fell and broke your wrist last year? And it healed just fine," he gently reminded her. "And you didn't even tell me for 3 weeks. Oh, Dad, what if something worse happens? What if you get hurt, and there's no one to call for help? Then that's my time to go, my love. It's a journey we all must take one day." "Please don't talk like that," she whispered. "I'm not trying to be difficult, sweetheart. I'm just being honest with myself. I'm an old man. This body is wearing down, but my heart isn't ready for a place with applesauce and bingo nights. My heart is here." "But for how long?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "For as long as I possibly can," he vowed. A silence settled between them then, and she let her gaze wander around the little cabin. Her eyes came to rest on the mantel, taking in the collection of smooth stones, the old button, the small carved figure, and the photograph of her mother, my beloved Ruth. "What are all these things?" she finally asked, her curiosity piqued. For a moment, he could have dismissed them as simple trinkets, souvenirs from a life lived. But this was Emily, his Ruth's daughter. She had her mother's eyes, and in them he saw a reflection of a love that deserved nothing less than the truth. "They're gifts," he said simply. "Gifts from who?" she wondered. "From my neighbors?" He answered, a small smile touching his lips. "What neighbors, Dad?" she asked, confused. "There isn't another soul for miles around here." He poured more coffee, a quiet moment of preparation, and then he let the story unfold for her. "Not all of it, my friend, just the parts that mattered most." He spoke of Scout, of the family that lived beyond our sight, of how these gentle souls in the woods had given him his life back, and how they were nothing like the legends whispered by the world. She listened with a beautiful stillness, never once breaking the spell of his words. When he fell silent, the quiet between them felt deep and long. Then her voice, soft with love, she asked, "Dad, have you ever spoken to anyone about this like a doctor? I'm not lost in my mind, Em. I never said you were, but it's what you're thinking. And that's okay, truly. I imagine most people would. But I know the truth of my heart, and I could never leave them. They need someone here who understands someone who doesn't arrive with cameras and science with that burning need to prove everything. They just need a soul who will let them be." Emily's eyes held a universe of emotion he couldn't quite map. Was it concern, a touch of sadness, or maybe a flicker of pride? It was impossible to say for sure. "The boys miss you so much," she said at last, her voice a gentle plea. "Would you come down for a visit just for a few days? Let them see their grandfather hasn't completely returned to the wild." And just like that, a laugh, a real one, from deep in his belly escaped him. "Return to the wild. All right, my dear, I can manage a few days." They decided on June. He would make the drive down, stay in her home, and let her love him in the way that daughters do, with real food and fresh laundry and a heart full of worry. And then he would return back to his cabin, his woods, and the beloved invisible neighbors who shared his world. Emily departed the next morning. At the door, she held him a little tighter, a little longer, and whispered that she loved him. She said she understood, even if a part of her couldn't. And you know that was more than enough. May arrived and dressed the world in a green so profound he'd never witnessed its equal. Everything, it seemed, burst forth in a hallelujah of life. The forest itself was a song filled with nesting birds, birthing deer, and the creek rushing high with the memory of melted snow. Jake tended his garden, that small patch of earth. Ruth began years ago, a ritual he continued out of love. Tomatoes, beans, squash, simple things that grew with ease and tasted of sunshine. He would see Scout now and then, always from a respectful distance, a sacred space between them. A simple raised hand, a quiet nod of the head, and that was all that was needed. It was a friendship that lived in the silence, for all the important words had already been spoken. One evening in late May, as Jake sat on his porch watching the sun paint the sky in colors that had no names, he saw the old one. He was alone this time, his movements slow and deliberate. The gray in his fur had spread like frost, and his shoulders seemed to carry a heavy weight. Even from afar, Jake could feel the effort in every single step. In that moment, he saw a reflection of himself in this creature. Two ancient souls by the standards of their kind, both unyieldingly stubborn. Two hearts holding on because to let go would feel like surrender, and that word was not written in the language of their spirits. The old one paused at the edge of the trees and raised a hand. It wasn't a wave, but a salute. A silent acknowledgement between two warriors who, though they fought different battles, understood the very same war. Jake lifted his own hand in return, and he sat just like that until the old one turned and melted into the growing shadows, until the sun finished its masterpiece, and the night draped itself over the world like a soft, familiar blanket. He went inside and lit the lamp, its glow a small comfort. He sat in its circle of light and thought about time, the way it flows like a river, how it takes things from us only to give them back in forms we never expected. Ruth was gone, but her lamp still burned brightly. Duke was gone, but his memory was a constant, warm companion. His own body was growing weary, but his spirit, my friend, felt more luminous than it had in decades. Perhaps that was the beautiful exchange. You trade your strength for wisdom, your speed for patience. You trade the long road of the future for a deeper, more profound love for the present. All things considered, it felt like a worthy bargain. And then June arrived. He drove to Portland and spent 4 precious days wrapped in the warmth of Emily and her family. He let her boys, who were truly young men, now at 19 and 21, take him out for dinner. He let them show him the lives they were building, their apartments, their girlfriends, their boundless plans. They were such good kids, so earnest with a sweet touch of innocence the way youth is meant to be. Just so good. Emily's house was a haven of comfort. She'd prepared the guest room just for him with clean sheets, soft pillows, and the steady hum of climate control. All the little luxuries of the modern world. And he was grateful for them, he truly was. But on the 4th night, as he lay in that perfect bed in that perfectly controlled room, sleep would not come. The silence felt all wrong, filled with the unfamiliar sounds of humanity, the rush of cars, the murmur of neighbors, the electric pulse of appliances. His heart ached for the forest, for the whisper of the wind through the pines, for the breathtaking possibility of witnessing something magical. He missed his home. He left the following morning a little earlier than he'd planned, making gentle excuses about needing to check on the cabin. Emily didn't argue. She just held him close and made him promise to call more often, to let her know if he ever needed anything, to not let his stubborn heart refuse a helping hand. And he promised, and he meant some of it with all his heart. The drive back felt like a return from a long exile. The very moment he crossed the boundary into the national forest, the moment the trees closed in around him like a loving embrace, a tightness in his chest finally let go. This was right. This was where his soul belonged. The cabin was just as he had left it, untouched and serene. But there on the porch, arranged in a perfect circle, were stones. Dozens of them of all different sizes, each one smooth and worn by the river. It was a welcome home. It was a silent message: we missed you. He stood there, the keys still clutched in his hand, and felt something inside his chest give way. It wasn't pain, but a release, like a pressure that had been building for far too long had finally found its freedom. He bent down and picked up one of the stones, slipping it into his pocket to keep. Then he went inside, set his bag down, and walked right back out to the tree line. He left them an offering of his own dried meat, fresh bread from his journey, and a note written on a torn piece of a paper bag that simply said, "Thank you." He knew they couldn't read his language, of course, but the gesture, the intention behind it, that was what truly mattered. That's what all language really is, isn't it? Just our intent given a physical form. A sound, a symbol, an action. All of it, just a vessel for the meaning held in our hearts. That night he could hear them closer than they had ever been, their presence a comforting weight just outside the cabin walls. He didn't go out. He didn't need to. He just sat by the lamp and listened to their sounds, the deep, gentle rumbles, the soft chirps, the very rhythm of their connection. It was a kind of music, a conversation, a testament to an intelligence our world had never quite learned to recognize. He fell asleep right there in his chair, and woke with the dawn, the lamp burned out, and a crick in his neck, feeling more truly rested than he had in weeks. The summer slipped by like a warm, hazy dream, filled with tending to the garden and long walks, that grew shorter as his body gently reminded him of its own seasons. He turned 69 in August. His dear Emily called, and so did his sister from California, a voice he hadn't heard in 5 long years. They sang him happy birthday through the phone, a sound both clumsy and wonderfully sweet. He thanked them, hung up, and spent the rest of his day wrapped in a quiet solitude that was exactly what his heart desired. My friend Scout came to visit that evening, and he brought his whole family with him. They stood at the edge of the trees, and their voices rose in what could only be a song. Jake sat on his porch and just listened. When their song was over, he clapped for them, a slow, deliberate sound. They heard it and answered with a deep rumble that felt like laughter, like acknowledgement, like a secret shared between friends. And that, you see, was his birthday party. It was better than any cake, more precious than any card. It was more than anything his soul could have ever wished for. September arrived with the first whisper of a chill in the air. The aspens began to turn their leaves to gold once more. Another year turning its page, another season preparing for its beautiful end so that the next could begin. The way it had always been, and the way it would continue long after Jake's own story was told. He thought about that more often now, the final chapter, not with a sense of dread, but with a quiet curiosity. His father had seen 74 years, his mother 68. He had already walked a longer path than she. Perhaps he would outlast his father too. Perhaps not. Either way, the horizon was far closer now than the shore he'd left behind. It didn't frighten him, not like it might have once. Death was just another doorway, another threshold to cross. If his beloved Ruth was waiting on the other side, that would be a beautiful thing. If it was just a quiet emptiness, that would be beautiful too. He would be tired by then, and so very ready to rest. But not yet. Not while the lamp of his life still burned so brightly. Not while his dear Scout still came to visit. Not while this found family still left him gifts and cleared his path of snow and sang him birthday songs in a language his ears didn't know, but his heart understood completely. No, not yet. October the 16th. That was the day the world held its breath. Jake woke to a silence that was absolute. It wasn't a peaceful silence, but a wrong one. The kind that makes the fine hairs on your arms stand up before your mind can even ask why. He dressed and stepped outside. The forest was utterly still, too still. There were no birds, no squirrels. Even the wind seemed to have vanished, as if the entire mountain was waiting for something to happen. And then he saw them. Not his family. Others. 3 figures stood at the far edge of his clearing. They were larger than Scout's family, broader in the shoulder, with a challenge in the very way they stood. They were watching his cabin. They were watching him. Jake's hand instinctively went to his belt, searching for the familiar comfort of his knife. It wasn't there. It was inside. A silent curse formed on his lips. The 3 figures began to move toward him, not with haste, but with a deliberate claiming purpose. Their very presence was a declaration. This is our land. You do not belong here, Ong. He heard the low rumble just a moment before he saw them. Scout's family emerging from the shelter of the trees on the other side. All 5 of them, placing their bodies like a living wall between Jake and the strangers. A line of defense, a circle of protection. The old patriarch stepped forward, his form a testament to weathered strength. Even with the weight of years upon him, his presence was a powerful, commanding thing. He let out a sound deep and resonant that said everything. This place is ours. He is one of us. Leave. The strangers stopped. The largest of them, surely their leader, answered with a sound that was pure, undiluted challenge. A clear reply. No, it is you who will leave. Jake had seen enough stories of the wild on television to know exactly what this was. This was the dance before the fight, the moment before violence. This was how lines were drawn in the dirt, how territories were claimed and kings were made. A sensible man would have gone inside, would have gotten out of the way and let them settle their own affairs. But his friend Scout was in that line. The old one who had brought him firewood was there. They were standing their ground for him, because of him. So he walked forward, his steps slow and measured, his hands held open and empty for all to see. "Hey!" he called out, his voice cracking from disuse, a strange, fragile human sound in the heavy air. "Hey, just stop." Every head on both sides turned to him. The strangers stared with what looked like pure confusion. Scout's family looked back with unmistakable alarm. Jake walked until he stood in the space between them, a fragile bridge connecting two worlds completely exposed. "This is my land," he said, his voice finding its strength as he pointed a steady hand at his cabin. "It's mine. I'm human. Do you understand?" The leader of the newcomers tilted his great head as if weighing the meaning of these strange words. "And these," Jake went on, gesturing to Scout's family, "are my neighbors. We have, you could call it an understanding. They leave me be and I leave them be. We help each other. Do you have a problem with that?" The stranger made a low sound in his chest, not of aggression but of what seemed to be a genuine question. "That's right. And if you want to be our neighbors too, that's fine. But you don't get to march onto my property and start a war. I may be an old man, but there's a rifle in that cabin, and believe me, I don't miss. So we can be friendly, or we can have a problem. The choice is yours." Jake had no earthly idea if his bluff was getting through, if any of it was understood. But he could see the leader was listening, truly considering. The hard lines of his posture had softened from challenge into something like uncertainty. Then dear Scout stepped forward. He made a series of soft, rumbling sounds, and Jake knew in his heart it was an explanation. He was vouching for him. The sounds seemed to say, "This human is different. He is safe. We trust him." The great stranger looked from Scout to Jake and then to the old patriarch. For a long moment the air was so thick with tension you could have carved your name in it. And then slowly, with a deliberate grace, the stranger raised one hand, palm open to the sky, a gesture of peace. The elder mirrored his nod, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. A sigh escaped Jake's lips, a breath he hadn't even realized he was clinging to. His legs trembled beneath him, a storm of adrenaline relief and sheer terror crashing over him all at once. And just like that, the strangers turned and melted back into the forest, vanishing as quietly as they had appeared. Scout's family stood as silent guardians until the woods were still again. Then the old one came to Jake, placing a heavy, warm hand on his shoulder and giving it a firm squeeze, a gesture that spoke volumes of pride and respect, whispering, "You did well." Then they too departed, leaving Jake alone in his clearing, his knees weak and his heart a wild drum in his chest. And in that quiet, the staggering truth dawned on him. He had just mediated a conflict between two ancient clans, armed with nothing more than sheer nerve and a prayer. He stumbled back inside and sank into his chair, remaining perfectly still for an hour. Just sitting, letting the frayed edges of his soul settle, allowing his body to remember the simple rhythm of peace. Oh, it could have ended in ruin in so many unspeakable ways. But it didn't. And through some miracle he had woven himself even deeper into the heart of Scout's family, proving he was not merely an ally, but a kindred spirit. A soul who would stand his ground, who would step into the fray even with everything to lose. That very night the elder returned, a solitary figure in the moonlight. He walked right up to the porch, ascended the steps one by one, and stood before the door as if weighing the world in his heart. Without a word, Jake opened the door and stepped aside, his silence a heartfelt invitation. The Ancient One stooped to enter his great frame, filling the doorway. Inside, he rose to his full height, or as much as the low ceiling would permit, and his gaze swept the room, taking in every detail. The soft glow of the lamp, the little treasures on the mantel, the cherished photo of Ruth, the humble furniture, all the quiet testaments to a life lived with simple, honest grace. His hand reached out, and with a surprisingly gentle touch he traced the lines of the small wooden figure the one Scout had carved for him. Then his eyes met Jake's, and a soft, affectionate sound rumbled in his chest, a sound that meant only one thing: family. Jake's heart swelled, and he could only nod in return. "Yes," he whispered. "Family." The elder then placed a hand over his own heart, and then ever so gently over Jake's. The meaning needed no words, for it was as old as time itself. "You are of our heart, and we are of yours." And then he was gone, melting back into the embrace of the night. But the truth of his gesture remained a profound and beautiful weight, a gift of pure honor. From that moment, Jake knew he belonged. He was no longer just a man, nor was he one of them. He was something new, a soul dwelling in the space between, a living bridge, a heart that could translate the language of two worlds. The remainder of October drifted by in a quiet peace. The strangers were not seen again, but Scout's family came by more often, their visits a gentle rhythm in his days. They would bring gifts from the forest: venison, fresh fish, sweet berries, or sometimes they would simply appear, their silent presence a question. "Are you well? Is your heart at peace?" He had become woven into the tapestry of their lives, a cherished part of their world. When they mapped the paths of the hunt, they drew a circle of safety around his home. As they moved like shadows through the trees, they were always aware of where he was. He was no longer an outsider, but a constant in their hearts, a truth factored into the sacred calculus of their survival. It was the deepest sense of belonging he had felt since his dear Ruth had passed, perhaps the deepest he had ever known. To be truly seen, to be known in your quietest moments, to matter to another soul, not for any service you could provide, but for the simple, unadorned fact of your being, because your heart was true, because you had given kindness freely and received it with grace. Isn't that what every heart longs for, really? To be a part of a larger story. To know that your own small light makes a difference in the darkness. To feel that the world is somehow warmer, kinder, simply because you are here. November arrived, dusting the world with an early snow, not a blizzard like the year before, but a soft, gentle blanket that made everything beautiful. Jake chopped wood and kept the fire humming, his gaze resting on the tree line, not with a pang of loneliness, but with a quiet, peaceful contentment. February brought his 70th birthday, and oh, that number felt different, held a weight that 69 had not. 7 decades, a longer journey than he had ever imagined for himself, and perhaps a kinder fate than he deserved after all the wild chances he'd taken in his foolish youth. His dear Emily had wanted him to come down for a party, but he gently declined, promising a visit when the world turned green again in the spring. She didn't press the matter. She understood now that his heart was home here, and he would live this life he'd chosen for as long as his body would grant him the gift of time. But on the morning of his birthday, the family came. All of them. More than he had ever seen gathered at once. Scout was there with his parents and others who must have been siblings or cousins, 12 souls in all. They filled the clearing, forming a silent, reverent semicircle before his little cabin. And then they began to sing. It was a language he did not know, not of English, nor of any human tongue. But it was music, pure and profound. It was a harmony so complex so achingly beautiful that it caught in Jake's throat. For what must have been 10 minutes, their voices filled the air, and then, as one, they fell silent. They bowed their heads, and quietly they departed. Jake sat there on his porch, the cold air on his cheeks mingling with warm tears. Birthdays had always been Ruth's domain, her special joy. She would fill the house with cake and color and the laughter of friends. He had always gone along simply because it made her soul shine. Since she'd been gone, the days had passed without notice. But this song in the snow, it was more than perfect. It was everything his lonely heart could have ever wished for. March arrived with the promise of a thaw, the snow receding like a slow tide. Tiny shoots of green began to pierce the earth, and you could feel life stirring again, asserting itself with that quiet, unyielding patience that is the very spirit of these mountains. But as the world awoke, Jake could feel his own body beginning to fade. The ache in his joints was a deeper fire now, his breath a little more ragged. Sometimes a wave of dizziness would wash over him if he stood too quickly. His body was whispering to him, its message gentle but clear. Not yet, my friend, but soon. He kept this from Emily, of course. What good would it do to tell her? Her heart would only fill with worry, and she would plead with him to move closer. He just couldn't bear to have that conversation one more time. Instead, he began to write. He poured out every memory he held of the family of dear Scout, of every wondrous encounter. He wasn't writing for science or to prove anything to a skeptical world. He wrote it simply as a testament, a record of the heart, so that this incredible story would not simply vanish when he did. He gathered the precious pages and placed them inside a metal box, sealing it against the passage of time. He buried this small treasure beneath the floorboards of the spare room. Perhaps one day another soul would find it, or perhaps not, and in his heart he knew either fate was perfectly fine. It was April 19th, my dear, and that morning began as they all do, with coffee, the quiet company of my porch, and the world slowly stirring to life. But something was different. A weight had returned to the air, that familiar electric hum, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, preparing to change everything. Just around noon, Scout emerged from the edge of the woods. He called to me with a sound I'd never heard before. It was urgent, a silent plea that simply meant, "Come." I grabbed my coat, my love, and I followed. Scout moved with a gentle patience, matching his pace to my own. We must have walked a half-mile into the heart of the forest, further than my old legs usually carry me. My lungs felt like they were on fire, and my knees sang a song of protest, but Scout would always look back, waiting for me, leading me onward. He led me to a clearing. I had never laid eyes on a small, secret cathedral of trees, and there in the very center lay the Old One. I knew my friend the moment I saw him. He was leaving this world. It was in the way his body was settled into the earth. The whisper-thin breaths he took, the grayness that had crept from his fur into his very skin. This was the end of his beautiful story. Scout sat faithfully by his side, and I saw the rest of his family was there, gathered in a silent, watchful circle. It was a vigil, and in that instant I understood why I was brought here. To be a witness, to offer honor, to say a final goodbye. I moved toward him slowly, kneeling beside him, as my aching knees complained with every inch. Up close, I could see his eyes were clouded over, perhaps with cataracts much like my own are beginning to be. But through that haze, they found me. They focused on me. They knew me. The Old One, with what strength he had left, reached out and took my hand. His grip was so fragile, the warmth already fading from his touch, but his meaning was as clear as a mountain spring. "Thank you," it said, "for all of it, for seeing us not as beasts but as souls, for being brave enough to be our friend." I gently squeezed his hand back, my voice thick with emotion. "The honor was all mine, my friend." He made a soft, contented sound, a final sigh of peace. And then he closed his eyes. His breath slowed and slowed again until it simply stopped. His family did not cry out. There was no wailing. They simply sat in a profound silence, letting the moment be what it was, allowing death its sacred dignity. I sat there with them for what must have been an hour, until my legs had fallen asleep and the sun had shifted the shadows across the forest floor. Then Scout's gentle touch on my shoulder told me it was time to go. We walked back the way we came, wrapped in a silence that said more than words ever could. You see, true grief has its own language. At the edge of the trees, Scout paused. He looked at me, his eyes full of a sorrow so pure it broke my heart, and he made a sound that was a testament to his loss. Then he turned and returned to his family, to begin the rituals of their people, the sacred ways they honor their dead. I went back inside my little house and sat by the lamp, but I didn't light it. I just sat there in the growing darkness, thinking of the old one, remembering how he was the very first to trust me, the first to show me kindness, the first to see something in this lonely old man that was worth protecting. He died knowing his family was safe, knowing his son had grown strong and wise, knowing they had an ally who had proven his heart time and time again. My friend, that is a good death, the kind of peaceful end we all hope for, but so very few of us are ever granted. I finally lit the lamp, letting its warm glow push back the night. I decided I would keep it burning all through the darkness, a small vigil of my own. For a friend, for a neighbor, for a soul who was more human than most humans I have ever had the misfortune to know. May arrived with a gentle touch, and the forest bloomed into a symphony of life. Flowers, bird song, new green shoots everywhere. The great cycle continues. You see whether we are here to witness it or not. The old one was gone, but his family, his legacy remained. Scout was their leader now. You could see it in the way he held himself, the quiet authority he carried, the way the others looked to him. I would see him from time to time, always from a respectful distance. He would give me a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of our shared memory. Things were different, of course. Scout had the weight of his family on his shoulders now and couldn't visit like before. I understood. That is the way of life. We change, and our relationships change with us. What truly matters remains, but it takes on a different shape. And I was okay with that. More than okay, my dear. I had been a part of something miraculous. I had witnessed a life most people could never imagine, and was given the trust of beings who had every reason to fear my kind. That was enough. It was more than enough. My Emily came to visit in June. She seemed to have aged again, more silver in her hair, more stories written in the lines around her eyes. We sat on the porch sipping coffee and talking about little things. The weather, her work, the boys. We stayed in that safe, comfortable harbor of conversation. "You look good, Dad," she said, a kindness in her lie. "I feel like hell," I told her, offering her the truth. She let out a soft laugh. "Fair enough." "How much longer do you think?" she asked, and we both knew she wasn't talking about her visit. "I don't know, honey. The doctor says I've got maybe a year, maybe less. My heart is just giving out. The kidneys aren't doing so great either." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Will you at least think about moving closer, so we can take care of you?" "No. Dad, Emily, my love, I am going to die here, in this home that holds my memories, near these woods that hold my heart. That is not up for discussion. You can visit me, you can call me, but I will not spend my last months in some sterile room watching terrible television just waiting for my last breath. She gently brushed a tear from her cheek. All right. All right. Yes, all right. My heart doesn't love it, but it is your life, my dear, your choice to make. Thank you, I whispered, my voice thick with relief. We sat in a shared comfortable silence for a moment. Then she turned to me and said, Tell me about them, your neighbors, the real story this time. And so I did. I wove the whole story for her from the first moment with Scout, to the wise old one, to the melody of their birthday song. She listened, my dear Emily, with an open heart. She never interrupted. She never judged. And when I finished, she simply said, I believe you. You truly do. I believe that your heart believes it. And honestly, Dad, after 70 years of knowing you as the most wonderfully stubborn, practical, no-nonsense man alive, if you say you've been living next to Bigfoot, then my dearest father, you've been living next to Bigfoot. A smile, a true one, bloomed on my face for the first time in months. Your mother, I said softly, she would have adored them. Oh, I know. She laughed gently. She would have tried to bake them cookies and adopt every last one. We laughed then, the kind of laughter that is laced with tears, the kind born from a shared memory, a shared loss, and the strange, beautiful grace of still being here to remember it all together. Emily left the next day. She held me in her embrace a little longer than usual. She whispered that she loved me. She promised she would see me soon. We both knew in our hearts that she probably wouldn't. Not soon enough. But it was all right. We had said everything that needed to be said. July burned hot, and August even hotter. I, Jake, spent most of my days in the cool of the shade, conserving my energy, measuring each movement like it was a precious coin. My body was beginning to close down. I could feel it. The systems failing, the parts giving out. The machine of me was grinding to a gentle halt. I wasn't afraid, just so very tired. A weariness that went down to my soul. September arrived with a sweet relief from the heat. The aspens began to turn to gold. Another cycle. Another year. I knew I likely wouldn't see the next one. That was all right, too. I had seen enough beauty for a lifetime. On the 23rd of September, I woke feeling a deeper ache than usual. I couldn't seem to catch my breath. My chest felt tight. A pain radiated down my left arm. I knew what it meant. My heart was failing. This was the beginning of the end. I didn't call for help. What would they do? Rush me away to a hospital? Tether me to machines? Buy me a few more days or weeks of discomfort? No, thank you. If this was my time, let it be here. Let it be a clean, quiet farewell. I made my way to the porch, sinking into my chair with a final effort. The lamp beside me was unlit. I didn't have the strength. The sun was setting, painting the sky with impossible colors, rose and violet and liquid gold. The forest deepened into shadow. The first stars began to appear. So beautiful. All of it. Worth every moment of seeing. Worth every moment of having lived. I heard them before I saw them. My family from the forest, emerging from the trees with Scout leading them. They had known somehow. Perhaps they had seen me struggle, or perhaps they simply sensed it. Death has a scent that the wild things know. They approached the porch, every one of them. They did not speak, for there was no need. They simply came and sat around me on the porch and in the yard, closer than they had ever been. They were honoring me. bearing witness, letting me know I would not be alone in my final moments. Scout climbed the porch steps. He sat beside my chair and put one of his hands on my arm. It was heavy and warm and so wonderfully real. Jake tried to speak, but the words would not come. But Scout made a soft sound of understanding. "It's all right," it seemed to say. "You don't have to say a thing." The ache in my chest was spreading, growing stronger, but I felt no fear. How could I? I was surrounded by family, by friends, by these gentle beings who had seen me at my best and my worst, and had chosen me anyway. The stars were coming out like tiny windows in the sky. My Ruth had loved the stars. She said they were proof that we continue on. That light could travel forever if nothing stood in its way. Maybe she was right. Maybe I would see her soon, and the wise old one, and see my Duke waiting with his tail wagging. Or maybe there would be nothing, just a quiet darkness, and the silence that comes when the signals in a tired brain fade away. Either one was fine. I had lived. I had truly lived. I had loved, and I had lost, and I had found something so strange and beautiful in my solitude. I had been chosen by the impossible. I had mattered, and that was enough. My love that was everything. My breathing slowed to a whisper. The pain faded into the distance. Everything felt lighter now, as if gravity was loosening its gentle grip, as if I could float away if I wanted to. I looked at Scout one last time. I tried to give him a smile. He squeezed my arm, a gentle pressure. "Goodbye, my friend." And then my friend Jake let his eyes drift closed, welcoming the dark, as if it were a gentle tide, letting it take him the way water takes a stone, making it smooth, making it whole, making it right. The lamp remained unlit, but oh, the stars held their vigil in the sky, and the ancient forest continued its slow, deep breathing. His family sat with him until the first light of dawn, and then they carried him to the clearing where the old one had passed, laying him to rest among their own in the soil he had so deeply loved, among the people who had so deeply loved him back. They marked his place with stones gathered from the river, each one worn smooth by time, each one perfect. They set them in a circle, a humble crown for a beloved soul. And sometimes they say when the moon is full and the wind holds its breath, hikers speak of seeing soft lights glowing in those woods, of hearing a sound that might be singing or mourning, or perhaps even a quiet celebration. The rangers, of course, will tell you, it's just the sound of animals, the whisper of the wind, nothing more than an imagination running wild in the dark. But a precious few, the ones who know how to listen with their hearts, how to see beyond their eyes, they look upon that circle of stones and understand the truth. They know that some stories aren't about proof, but about connection, about the miraculous grace of being truly seen, about the beautiful thing that happens when you choose kindness over fear. It's about what it means to keep a lamp burning not for someone who might come, but in loving memory of the one who did, because he stayed, because in that sacred space between human and other, between what is known and what is mystery, between loneliness and belonging, there existed a love that had no name but felt exactly like home, and that my dear friend was more than enough. In the end, it was everything. It was the whole beautiful point all along.